Welcome back to Mastering Menopause. Today, I am honored to have a special guest join us, William Grazione, also known as the Educated Dieter. William is a husband and father of 4 children and a pro natural bodybuilder. He has a BS in exercise science and is the CEO and founder of the Educated Dieter, and 14 years of experience in the fitness and coaching industry. William has helped countless of individuals achieve their health and wellness goals through his expertise. In this episode, William is going to be sharing his insights on how to navigate menopause using a science-based approach to nutrition, training, and lifestyle. Thank you so much for being here, William.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I absolutely love the name of your podcast. That is genius.
Thank you. Do you mind giving us a little bit of backstory on how you became involved in fitness in the first place, and then the path that led you to where you are right now as a respected coach and educator with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes us all the way back to young William at, I think, 6 or 7 years old. For Christmas one year, my uncle bought me a bar and some weights. And he basically said, hey, they called me Boo Boo back then. He said, hey, Boo Boo, pick up this bar and curl it 20 times. I picked the bar up, he put my back against the wall, and I curled it 20 times. And that was the very first time I had ever had a pump in my life. And I was 7 years old at the time. And since then, I had always just gravitated towards being able to put my energy into something that felt good. And for me, that was resistance training. And so as I got a little bit older, I just kept lifting weights. And then it was very clear that I was kind of like stronger than most of the other kids in the neighborhood. And ultimately, kids even at 10, 11, 12 years old started to ask me if they could work out with me. Right. So then I'm like, I took it upon myself to be like, I'm going to make all my friends strong, just like I was. Right. And so then that actually turned into a really big interest in exercise science. I played football through Little League, high school, and college. And then I actually ended up switching my major over because I wanted to be a football coach. And then I switched my major over to nutrition and exercise science when I was a junior. And ultimately that, kind of put me on path to learning more about the ins and the outs of exercise science. And it was my senior year, I realized that my professors, in all fairness, and this is not having an ego, it just was, I was always a forward thinker. Right. I kind of wasn't okay with just reading out of a textbook because some of the things that I was seeing in real life, it didn't seem like it applied. And so I would ask questions and they'd get upset with me because they didn't know the answers. And for most college professors, like if they don't know the answer to enough things, it's like sometimes they could get a little frustrated. So then I began to scour the internet. I began to find really good, helpful information by certain individuals that were already in the space, such as Dr. Joe Klemczewski, Lane Norton, Dave Gooden, Skip LaCour, and a lot of these pro-natural bodybuilders at the time that were putting out phenomenal evidence-based information. And so I gravitated towards it and graduated with my bachelor's in exercise science in 2010. And then from that point, I just became a sponge for knowledge, information, education, and trying to create some level of awareness inside the space. I went full time in 2012. And from that point, I realized after coaching so many women, so I was a physique and bodybuilding coach in the beginning, and I coached a lot of women. I believe we had earned up until about 2014, 15, we had probably won about 30 to 45 pro cards, somewhere around there. I had a couple world champions and the business was going really well in the bodybuilding space. But then what I noticed, just because I like to ask questions, I like to communicate, I like to talk, was a lot of my females were having some cycle irregularities. So they were skipping their periods, maybe they didn't recover the same as my male clients. Maybe I couldn't push them as hard. And then after the show, some of them reverse dieted really well, while some of them would just gain weight back at an exceptional rate and they didn't feel good. So then I also got married kind of around the same time to my now wife, and she was actually one of my clients. Right. And so then I was like, what can I do to help my own wife? And I had to really learn how to implement certain strategies. Things like I made kind of what's called like a diet break in 2014, basically just through an experimental phase of trying a back-to-back high carb day, realizing that it worked really well, and then trying 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, a whole week, and actually having people kind of assess through a report or what is a Word document. How did you feel here? How did you feel here? And that, to me, I did it so many times for my female clients that I realized that this break should be something that is non-negotiable in many fat loss phases. And ultimately, it helped a lot of my clients look even better on stage, recover better, not skip their cycles, and all the things that I was trying to improve at the time. And then the very first year, I think I went full bore into female health, which is what we're going to be talking about now, is I believe it was like 2016, 2015. And that first year I did that, I actually ended up helping about 40 women regain their periods in that first year. And I was like, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew I was onto something. And I knew it had a lot to do with recovery or proper recovery, because I was asking a lot of my friends in the space. And I mean, you and I were just talking. I'm not going to name drop anybody, but I was asking some of my friends in the space. I'm like, hey, these women are losing their cycles. They're not responding the same. They're not going to the bathroom anymore. Like, what should we do? And, the general answer I'd get was, it's all normal. Don't worry about it. And I wasn't okay with that. And so I began to unpack as much about the female physiology as I could, learning what made up the differences between the male physiology and the female physiology, and started to create some methods that I felt like could actually help women more than the methods that were traditionally used. So that's how I got involved. That's how I got started. And that's what kind of sparked my interest.
Yeah, I love that. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the biggest takeaway there is that there is a difference between, men and women, and how do we approach that, and so the frustration with the menopause female, we're just not getting the information that we need. So let's start with some of the most common challenges of menopause, which is my demographic: trouble sleeping, brain fog, hot flashes and night sweats, not feeling like yourself, some depression. And then unfortunately, it's the one that gets everyone's attention, is the weight gain, especially in the abdominal area. And I think we just get used to having all these symptoms, but this seems to happen overnight, when really in reality, we know it doesn't. But a lot of the doctors are just saying, you go to your doctor and it's just your age, it's normal, and prescribing a sleeping pill or even birth control, for a 45-year-old woman, or, antidepressants. And we're just not addressing the root cause issues. And so what do you find to be the most common underlying factors for these ladies? Because we know it's hormones, right? But I don't think that most women understand what hormones, and it just becomes a blanket statement. It's my hormones, and not taking into consideration thyroid issues, insulin resistance, and how our lifestyle factors can affect our hormones and then its effect on the metabolism.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do agree with you in the fact of how traditional Western medicine typically treats most women. That's very commonplace. And I suppose one of the key primary issues, and I know this on a different level as well, because I've probably coached about 30 doctors at this point in time over the last maybe 3 years. And so part of my coaching service includes me actually speaking to people. And so when I have the opportunity to jump on a Zoom call with an MD or NP or an ARMP, or like these people that are extremely intelligent when it comes to what they should be doing and the internal physiology, how it works, and then the system of traditional Western medicine, I would agree with you in that those are typically the most common things. But I think most people, there's a big group of individuals right now, specifically traditional Western medicine practitioners, that are switching over and starting practices inside the realm of functional medicine or functional nutrition. And it's primarily because they're kind of getting sick and tired of just throwing medications at customers or clients or patients. And so they really want to find out, like, what's the root cause of this? And we actually really want to help the N of one individual, because you're probably aware, but the traditional Western medicine model, it's like, hey, you have a checkup, you go see your PCP, see you again in 3 months. It's like the amount of things that can happen in 3 months is pretty crazy. So when you have the access to an educated coach that understands hormone imbalances and understands metabolic adaptations on a different level, and you have access to them on a daily basis, it's like we can actually solve these cases because we have so many different communication touch points. But again, I don't blame the system. I don't blame the practitioners. I don't anything like that. It's just to say, like, the system is somewhat flawed in their inability to communicate really well and consistently. So what I would say is this: education brings awareness, right? So the more we can educate, the more women are going to be aware, as simple as that is. And so for most women, I think what they have to understand is that you should be getting yourself ready for the perimenopause into menopausal transitional time period, which is typically 5 to 10 years, right? So the typical age of entering menopause is anywhere from 48 to 51 years old, and that's based off of the United States population of women. But you have to really start to get yourself ready in your early 40s. In my opinion, I think that's the best advice that I could potentially give. So then people would say, okay, William, well, what should I be doing differently? Because I'm dieting, I'm going to Orange Theory 6 days a week. I meet my boot camp instructor at the park every Saturday. I'm only eating vegetables and chicken. I'm like, well, that's exactly the problem. Everything you just listed, that is the problem. So what I hope to do in explaining this is basically just help your listeners kind of set them up to say, like, what should I be doing? And then ultimately what's going to help me during this process or this specific phase in time. So some of those side effects you mentioned, I think we can dive into those a little bit. And if you want to have like a back and forth conversation, I'm totally okay with that. But the adipose gain, typically that's due to the inability to respond to the applied stressors. So therefore, and just in general, most women in their 40s, life is just way more stressful than it's ever been, right? Let's just say, for instance, they decide to have some children. They've got 1 kid, 2 kid, 3 kid, 4 kid, 5 kid. I know a family down the street that's got a dozen of them. Okay. I've got 4. And believe me, like it's good. Like, and I try to help my own wife with a lot of this stuff because she's 45. But the reality is, you can only do so much to kind of counteract the stress. But I think what you can do to create a body that's more resilient is actually every now and then, like, you got to be doing some hard stuff. You got to be resistance training for sure, at least a couple of days a week. You got to be putting your body in a position where it can learn to be more resilient. So maybe even including some things like high intensity intervals or something like that. But the most important thing is not dramatically underfeeding your metabolism. I'd say that's going to be the number one thing. But most women in their 40s, the primary thing they're always trying to do is just keep dieting. Right. Yeah. It's like you have so many diets out there in the world today, and all of your friends is on a different one. So therefore, you have a plethora and an abundance of different diets that you can try. But the issue is, what I would say is this term that we know of as extreme metabolic adaptation. Now, I say extreme metabolic adaptation because the downregulatory side effects of the thyroid typically, in most cases, happen with women that are in their 40s or their late 30s, because they've tried every single diet that there is under the sun, and they've never actually taken the time to build muscle, to metabolically recover, to optimize the hormones that were negatively influenced due to the chronic long-term diet. And so those would probably be the key things that I would say would be the most important. Is what most women are doing in their 40s, they should be doing the exact opposite, right? So let's go ahead and circle back real quick. So if you're on a very low calorie diet, stop. If you're not doing, like more intense resistance training, stop doing your cardio kickboxing class and lift weights. Get as strong as you can. Because as women begin to age, and I think as it's like 45 to maybe 50 years old, it becomes harder to build muscle. It becomes harder to keep muscle because you experience something called anabolic resistance, which basically, if you're not lifting weights and you're over dieting and you're starving yourself and you're fasting and you're doing all these things, you can lose pounds and pounds of muscle every single year, thus slowing down your metabolism. Right. And while it may not seem like a big deal to lose a couple of pounds in a year, what does that look like over the 5-year perimenopausal transition? That's a lot of muscle that's just gone because you decided to keep yourself in a position where you're always going to boot camp. You're doing cardio every day. You're under eating protein because somebody told you that veganism is amazing, and you're under eating on calories. And probably the most important, you're under recovering because your nutrition isn't in alignment with your training. Right. So there's a lot of different things. And then I would also add on to that the way you feel is going to dramatically dictate what you do. Right. So during the perimenopausal into menopausal transition, some of the things that happen, and we can talk about this more in depth a little bit later, but your androgenic hormones will begin to decline, such as testosterone, which is what gives you that drive and that, all of that. And then your progesterone, which is your calming hormone in the female physiology, that begins to decline as well, which in many cases leads a lot of women to becoming relative estrogen dominant, which can dictate how you feel on a daily basis. So your hormones make up how you feel. So if I wake up, I'm determined, I'm motivated, I feel great, I've got energy. I can go to the gym. I can go walk 10,000 steps. I can cook my meals. I can handle my family. I can, whatever it takes. I got this. But if you wake up and you don't feel good, you got aches, hard to get out of bed, you got adrenal insufficiency because you're chugging coffee all day long every day, right? You're going to the gym, but you're never recovering because you're eating 1,000 calories. That's eventually going to catch up to you. And you're going to say, I'm just tired. Tired people don't go to the gym. Tired people don't walk as much as they're supposed to. Tired people don't prep their meals. Tired people just throw in the towel. And so what I'm trying to promote here is massive acceptance and responsibility for men and women as they age to take care of themselves.
Yeah, you nailed it for sure. I find too a lot of, as far as stress, right? The stress response, and
For sure.
we're just running around, right? With that coffee in hand, we're doing intermittent fasting, running around all morning long, doing our workouts and just creating that stress environment. But my workout is my stress relief, right? And just piling like fuel onto the fire. And I don't think women understand what they're doing to their bodies. I hop on phone calls all the time, and this is exactly what I see. I am going to 4 to 5 days a week. And then I do, like you said, my kickboxing class, and I have this, and, I'm eating 1,200 calories, and I don't know why I can't lose weight. So this just piling this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stress on top of stress.
It sounds like to me, you are putting yourself in a position where you're trying to provide the knowledge, the awareness, the education to help these women understand that they are still in power, right? You do still have an option. You can do these things, these specific things, and put yourself in the best position possible to essentially help you master menopause, right? And so I love the message. I love that, you guys are really, talking about this. And I'm just excited for the future, because I think it's finally time that people started to provide some awareness and education to women in that space. Because the reality is, like, besides all the marketing gimmicks and all the marketing ploys that we see today, there's not a lot of real science to validate what's being promoted.
Right. And I find the pursuit for weight loss, is probably one of the biggest obstacles to women actually realizing getting those results that they want in the first place, right? Because it's always that pursuit of weight loss and ignoring the symptoms that we have and just kind of overlooking that. And then it really comes to a head. So where do you start off a client who's having, these issues with thyroid, and maybe they don't understand like that this is actually what's going on. I just want to lose weight, and start with that client who's just, I need to lose 20 pounds, right? Or that's maybe not where we're going to start. Or maybe
what I think is the most important. Well, this is what I think is the most important, is that many people will start up a new client, but they don't have any plan for them. Right? I do something called ADP. I call it annual diet planning. And essentially what this is understanding that every single season of life is, quote unquote, a little bit different. Right? And so take, for instance, professional athletes. Okay. How many games do they actually play a year? They don't play all season. They don't play. Well, they play all season, but they don't play for the whole year. Right? Mm-hmm. Think about it like the NFL. These are the best athletes in the entire world. Okay. And they play 16 to 20 games max. And then they have 6 months to actually recover. And when I got into bodybuilding, I realized, I'm like, how come bodybuilders never take breaks? Like, every football game I ever played my entire life, I had a halftime, because I needed to talk to my coach. I needed to reassess the game plan. I needed to make sure that I felt good, that I could actually grab a snack, drink some water, rehydrate, do all the things I needed to do so that I could enter into the next phase of that work. Right, of the second half of that game. But a lot of people, they put themselves in positions where they're chronically always dieting, right? So you go from one season to the next season, to the next season, to the next season, without ever recovering the hormones that were negatively influenced, or the stress that was accumulated during the fat loss diet. And so that's the first thing that I like to try to do, is I try to plan this thing out. If you're going to hire me for 6 months or 12 months, let's map it out to the best of our ability. Look, you came to me, you have 10 years of dieting experience. You've never recovered more than a month before diving back into another diet. The first thing we need to do is we need to stop you from dieting. I have to allow your physiology to thrive. I have to allow you to try to build some new lean body mass. I need to put you in a position where if there's any hormone imbalances or anything like that, we can actually fix those. If there's digestion problems, we can fix those. If there's adrenal insufficiency, overstimulation, we can fix those issues. Whatever the issues are, we can fix them in that first, usually 1 to 6 months. It just depends on what the issue actually is.
Mhm.
And from that point, guess what? 4 to 6 months go by, we have the body back online. It's exactly where it's supposed to be. It's eating a good amount of calories. It's not overtraining. It's not under recovering. It doesn't have hormone imbalances anymore. Stress is under control. Blood sugar is under control. All these things are under control, and an under control body will respond to a fat loss phase. What we're experiencing a lot now inside the nutritional coaching industry is simply this. You have a lot of people that are hiring coaches that are putting them inside of a calorie deficit or calorie restriction. And what's happening? Nada.
Right.
They don't
Well, hold
respond.
on, because
Right.
you're obviously not in a calorie deficit. If you're not losing weight is the message,
Yeah.
right? Is hammering.
Yeah.
You need to be in a calorie deficit. You're lying about your calories. You're obviously not in a calorie deficit. That's why you're not losing weight, I think, is the biggest message that we see right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it's been talked about for a very long time. And I think that honestly, inside the male populations, I think for the majority of people, you could probably pretty much take that to the bank. But the reality is for women, I've seen it so often where you could take them down to 1,000, 1,100 calories. They're doing a lot of exercise. They're dramatically under eating what they should be under eating, and they still don't respond. And their actual response, if you're tracking any, biometric data or like biofeedback data, is like their stress response actually goes up. So if you're checking cortisol or you're doing a 4-point saliva test, you could see maybe they have like a flip-flop circadian rhythm, or they have very high cortisol first thing in the morning, or they have insulin resistance, or when you tried to put them into a quote unquote calorie deficit, their blood sugar shot up. Those are all things that I've seen, that I've experienced. And at this point in the game, I've seen it so many times and I've done it so much with my clients, nobody can change my mind about it. And so the calorie deficit, I get it. I understand it. And from a male perspective, I do think it, for many cases, I think it holds true. But the only times I've seen like really extreme metabolic adaptation in men is when the individual may come from like a background in the military, where they're running and they're on rations for, months and months and months, or maybe somebody that was like a collegiate wrestler where they're cutting 20, 30 pounds in a month just to make weight. Cross-country runners, males and females, collegiate female cross-country runners, that's a really bad deal. But those are the issues in men that I've seen where they all experience something similar, where I could get them down to, 13, 1,400 calories and they're still really not responding all that great. But for females in menopause or in the perimenopause and menopausal transition, I do see it quite often. And oftentimes it's just because the stress response is actually stopping your ability to oxidize body fat.
So how do you start off a client with that? Do you start off with testing? Are we looking at just biofeedback?
Yeah. So I have what's called an MSQ document. So it's a metabolic stress questionnaire. And basically what I do, it's different than a normal questionnaire, essentially just because I'm asking like questions about how you feel, like your energy, weight gain, brain fog, your digestive tract, your bones, your joints, like all of that kind of stuff. And so after looking at one of those, I can get a pretty good feel for where the client's at. Okay. So as an example, if they complete my MSQ and it's got, I think, a dozen different categories, and I'm basically tallying up a total score at the bottom. Mm-hmm. And for women that do have some pretty severe stuff, typically like anything 40 or over, I'm flagging them as a hormone case, right? Anything 30, 40 or under that. So there's usually not very many people that are in the 30s or 40s. It's usually either I'm like a 10 and I have nothing to worry about, calories in, calories out, calorie deficit, training, cardio, all the normal macronutrient style exercise, science-based coaching methods that we can use, they will respond here. Okay. Yeah. The people that are like 40s, 50s, 60s, I've seen 118 before on this thing. Okay. They ain't responding to anything. So therefore, we actually have to take a different approach, which is more of a functional medicine or functional nutrition approach, where we're addressing their internal health first. So it typically, it definitely goes against what's strategically done in the space. But I would say that it's the best thing for that person at that specific moment in time. Because most of the time, the women that I'm getting that are in this position, they've already worked with a couple of different coaches and the coach couldn't crack the proverbial code, right?
It didn't work.
It just didn't work for me. So I said, okay, cool. Well, like, what were you doing how much exercise were you doing? Did they prioritize recovery? Did they try or attempt a carb cycle? Did they try to do a detoxification process, a metabolic reset, a flush protocol? Like, what did they actually do? Fill me in so that I have some background data. And from that point, normally what I'll do is I'll start them on something called a metabolic reset process. And the metabolic reset process is pretty simple, but to simplify it for the audience, basically what we're doing is we're trying to address adrenal health. Okay. We're addressing liver health, and we're addressing gastrointestinal detoxification, or phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of the detoxification and elimination process. Okay. We are also typically being somewhat more restrictive with their nutrition choices in the beginning. So I'll choose something like an anti-inflammatory diet just to help get any like potential for high inflammation down. And granted, some people just look like they have high CRP on labs because they trained the day before, but I actually send out a protocol to follow. So I'm like, don't hard resistance train for 72 hours, because I want to make sure that the inflammatory response from this is not from training. Right. And then also, like, it's important to note, like, have they been sick all the time? Like, how are they feeling? Are they having the night sweats, the mood fluctuations, the insulin resistance, the weight gain, specifically in the stomach? Like, what's actually going on? And then normally the second thing for that, after we've addressed the diet, and for the diet, I'm normally having them increase their calories pretty substantially. Now, some people that scares the hell out of them, but for some other people, they understand, okay, what you're telling me makes sense. I've put myself in this position because of the choices and the habits that I've accumulated throughout my life. And now it's time to make a massive shift in a different direction. And as long as you can teach them, in many cases, they will execute on the protocol, but you have to be a really good teacher, which is why I spend so much of my time trying to educate people on like my social media account and stuff, is because, in all honesty, like, if you've watched me talk about this stuff for hours, then it's like when we start working together, you kind of already know, you know what I mean? And so from that point,
sorry to interrupt, but I do love your 101 series, right? Where you're really breaking this down, right? And bringing that, those conversations to light, because for the most part, I would say a small percentage of our clients are going to get that, right? I understand I need to eat more calories. Most are going to be, what? Yeah. You want me to eat what? And so if you guys, and I'll drop the links to William's Instagram, but you definitely want to follow that for, the education piece is just so huge in, just why do we have to do this? And it takes a bit for us as coaches to help a woman understand why they need to come out of this dieting phase because of the effect that they've had on their hormones. So I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think it's great conversation. So the next thing you would want to do is basically make sure that you're trying to remove stressors from your body, right? And essentially, in a simple way to put this, is the things that you would want to be doing. Number one is going to be feeding yourself enough. Right. I think people don't understand the correlation between applied stress and proactive recovery, but how you feed yourself really does make a huge difference. Second thing to that is you would probably want to pull back on a lot of extreme intensity styles of exercise. You'd also want to stop fasting. You'd also want to stop doing these like moderate intensity, steady state, or like boot camp style cardio classes and all that kind of stuff. Those would be the main adjustments that I think. And then also just prioritizing the foundations, like drink enough water, allow your body to detoxify itself, try to make sure you're going to the bathroom every single day, try to make sure you can have a pretty decent sleep routine in place. Now, granted, I have 4 kids, so I understand it's not always going to be perfect, but trying to maximize that to the best of your ability, right? It's like, if you know you can't fall asleep at night, you probably shouldn't be staring at a 70-inch 4K plasma screen before bed. If you know you can't sleep at night, you probably shouldn't be answering your emails at 12 o'clock at night. Whatever it is, set yourself up for a productive night's sleep, because all of our hormones actually restore and regenerate while we're sleeping. And if you're having terrible quality sleep, it's like, well, then you're waking up with a suboptimal recovery either way. So this is where I think something like an Aura ring or something like that can be very beneficial, because it actually gives you some level of awareness as far as like, did I train legs really hard yesterday? Did I sleep like crap? Okay, what's my recovery status? Like, truthfully, where am I actually at? And this was actually very apparent to me a couple of years ago. I had probably a dozen of my female clients invest in Aura rings. They were like, I want the data too, coach. And I was like, all right, cool. And what I noticed was that most of them Because I had assumed that a lot of these like really high intensity style training programs and the fasting diets and all that kind of stuff was actually causing some recoverability issues. And so what I did was I had them all train legs pretty hard one day. And I wanted to see over the course of those 12 specific differences, how long did it take to recover from training legs? And the general response was 48 to 72 hours. Right. So then I'm like, okay, well, they train legs, they have I'd say a fair amount of volume. It wasn't a crazy high volume routine. It was maybe 4 or 5 exercises, 2 to 3 sets on each one, 8 to 12 reps each one, taking the final set on each exercise, close proximity to failure. And still like the women that would train harder, sometimes it took them 72 hours. So then I'm analyzing that information. I'm like, yeah, but what about all these women that are like training and they're doing 3 leg days a week, or even sometimes I've seen even more than that. Like they're just never able to recover. So then that's why I started to only do legs twice a week or twice every 8 days with most of my women, because that data taught me a lot. But you have to be willing to step outside the box. You have to be willing to put yourself in a position to be wrong. You have to be willing to, do these types of things and kind of humble yourself to what you don't know. If I just said, if I just stood here and I was like, nope, everybody recovers the same and it's calories in, calories out. That's all that matters. I'm not even talking about any hormonal modifications, metabolic adaptations, anything like that. And just to say that everybody falls in line with the same process, it's good for marketing, but it's not good for helping people, because there's going to be a lot of people that do not fit into the mold.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of a pushback too. It's not menopause that's stopping you from losing weight, which there's a little bit of truth to that. However, right, people just don't understand, right? I think we can't blame our hormones for that, but we do, like you said earlier, have to take some acceptance to the lifestyle changes that we need to make so that it isn't just your hormones, that are
no, 100%. You shouldn't be blaming your hormones.
Yeah.
So your hormones and your metabolism, stop trying to separate them. They're not different. But what affects our metabolism, how we treat it, what affects our hormones, subsequently, it's the same exact thing. Right. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to be really doing anything, it's looking in the mirror and it's saying, well, not me, because I'm not a woman, but I can still put myself into a position where I have extreme metabolic adaptation. I'm under eating, I'm overtraining. I can do all that. I can shut down fat loss in my own body and I'll just start to dwindle away. But for the majority of women, I think it's more so like I think they want to find something to blame. So therefore, they'll hear maybe these influencers saying, it's not your hormones. And then they'll be like, it is my hormones, or it is your hormones, and specifically that. But like these people, these people in general, what they'll do is they'll try to give you an scapegoat. It's your hormones. It's like, are you trying to separate metabolic function and metabolic health from hormones? Because you can't, because they work synergistically, right? It's like a wheel. It just spins. If you hit a speed bump, it might slow down a little bit, but they work together. And so what you really need to be thinking about is taking a step back and saying, why is the general health of my metabolism in this position? Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and you can't address that unless you have the education to dictate why it actually happened, right? So like, it's like, all right, well, my sleep's been terrible. Okay. I have 5 kids and I'm running them around all over the place. And because I'm taking care of them 5 kids, I never feed myself. Mm-hmm. Right. So therefore, even if you're overweight or whatever, you'll stay overweight. You're barely eating anything, but you're staying overweight. How does that make sense from a calories in, calories out perspective? Right. And so there's a lot of different things that we need to take a look at. I'm doing only cardio classes, but I never lift weights. The trainer at the gym told me only light weights to tone. Right. The nutritionist at the gym said, oh, you're a 5'4" woman that weighs 150 pounds. You should only be eating 1,200 calories a day. Right. It's like all that stuff is what's creating the problem. So I believe that the diet culture that we have currently is what's created the issues for a lot of these women. Now, granted, there's so much societal pressure too. So I'm not blaming women at all. Like, I show up to help them every single day in my business. But I would also say that the societal pressures to always be thin, to lose weight, that's very real too. So, as a man, I don't know what that's like, but I have 3 daughters and I'm married and I was raised by a single mom, so I understand it. Right. And so basically I've tried to make it, part of my life's work to show up to help those women that are in need of help. And for the majority of them, I think they need to learn how to ignore the nonsense and focus on the things that are really going to help them long term. And it was funny. I was having a conversation with my wife 2 weekends ago. And, people have always asked her, like, hey, Tanya, how do you stay in such great shape? And so on and so forth. And, for her, the answer was simple. She was like, I just told him that I eat 140, 150 grams of protein every day. I never eat under 1,800 to 2,000 calories, and I lift weights 4 days a week. And I was like, you're kind of saying something there. Like, that's a lot. That is a lot what you're unpacking. And I would have to agree that I think for most people, not dieting is ultimately going to be the thing that helps them preserve their metabolic health. Now, if you want to lose body fat, that's fine too, as long as you're healthy enough to do it. And you also need an educated coach to be able to guide you in and guide you out. Because there's a lot of people that'll say, hey, Kathy, I'm going to start you off on 2,000 calories and we're going to linear diet down to 1,000. And you're like, if that's how you do it, I'm in. Right. And then at the end of that, you end up with hypothyroidism, you end up estrogen dominant with low androgens, and your metabolism's metabolically suppressed. And then the recovery phase after that is, well, let's gain all the 20 pounds you lost back in 2 to 3 months, right? So there's an intelligent way to lose body fat. And that's why I'll say, diet smart, become an educated dieter, all those things, because I truly do believe it.
Yes. So we're getting short on time, but I did want to unpack where
I talk a lot.
Where do you start with testing, right? So I know you're like, let's test, not guess, right? So
sure.
when we see, so let's talk about that and looking at blood work and some of the things that you can do at home.
Yeah, sure. So I think blood labs, using a blood glucometer, like all that stuff's really important. But don't miss the goalpost. Like the important stuff is the foundational stuff first. Unless somebody comes to me and they got an MSQ that's like 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, I'm probably not telling them to go test first. I'm probably going to say, hey, let's just dial in this foundational stuff. I've got a whole system. Me and my team use it. Let's just dial in this stuff for the first 2 to 4 weeks. If we can take that MSQ score, we can slice the number in half. Do you agree that you're going to feel better?
Absolutely.
Yeah, duh. Okay, fantastic. So then we could say, well, was it a hormone issue or was it just the fact you weren't treating your body very good? Right. But then test, not guess. I always will say if somebody, had a number that's 50 or more, we should get some blood labs done just to check. Because in my own world, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was having some health problems. I started to gain some weight. I wasn't happy with it. And I, just generally didn't feel good. I was overstressed and all the stuff. And when I got blood labs done on myself, I was like 31, 32 years old. I thought I was pretty darn healthy. But come to find out, I had high A1C, I had high blood sugar. My testosterone, which was high, was also converting a lot to estrogen. Right. And I almost kind of felt like that, a little bit more emotional, a little bit more short fuse, things like that. And then I also noticed I had high liver enzymes. And then what was the other thing? Oh, I had genetically high A1C. Right. And so I would have never known that stuff unless I would have taken a look at my blood labs. Now, everybody in my family, very overweight. Okay. So like when I was growing up, my uncle was close to 300 pounds. My mom was around 280. My grandpa was close to 300 pounds. My grandma, God bless her soul, was 4'9", overweight. And I watched her and my mother both inject insulin into themselves 2 to 3 times per day, every day since I was about 15 years old. And I just decided that wasn't the way I wanted to live. You know what I mean? And so for me, I think I was just eager enough to go get some blood work done, to go check. Once I realized that it was fairly non-invasive process. Like it's really not that big of a deal. I know that a lot of people are scared of it, but with some of these online companies like Avexia and Life Extension, stuff like that, like you just buy it online, use your PayPal account, you'll get a package sent to your door. You call up the nearest LabCorp, LabQuest, they have a professional phlebotomist there. You extract 5 vials, you get the results back in a week. I mean, it's really, really simple. And you don't have to worry about going to your chiropractor or some other, traditional doctor and paying a lot of money out of pocket for blood labs. I mean, you can
Or
get a
having
full
them
panel.
refuse to run them.
100%. Yeah. And
They'll
so
be
you
like, you
could,
don't need that.
yeah, 100%. And so you can get a full panel through Life Extension for like $200. If you want to go a little bit more detailed, you could go through something like Avexia and you could get like a custom order lab panel for probably $300. And, in all honesty, you're saving yourself a lot of time, stress, and you can actually learn what's going on if you just reach out to somebody that knows how to interpret blood work. As far as using a blood glucometer, super simple. You can do it at home. You can buy it on Amazon. And I think it's a good idea to do for most women that are in that perimenopausal to menopausal transition, because once again, it just provides you some level of awareness. Doing both of those and having somebody interpret the information for you can begin to make you more of an advocate for your own health, right? So you're not just going to see your PCP once a year. They run a blood glucose, a CMP, a CBC, and that's it. And then they send you on your way. You could actually really start to learn about what's going on and what makes me unique, right? So the interesting thing about maybe myself, even at 10, 11% body fat, my A1C is high. I wish it wasn't, but my whole family's overweight. So it's still easy for me to gain weight pretty rapidly. And I just think a lot more people should become advocates for their own health. So as far as the testing goes, test not guess, that's what I would say is probably the easiest thing to do. But the most important thing is having a guide that can get you from where you are to the desired outcome.
With a plan. And, so for somebody that maybe can't afford coaching, what would be like the biggest rocks that we can address first for, how can women who are going through menopause help themselves? And as far as lifestyle factors, caffeine, alcohol, exercise, training, so setting themselves up.
Yeah, I mean, the foundational things I think many people should focus on. And granted, this is blanketing a very large topic because I believe everybody's an N of one individual and they should be treated that way. But I would say the general things are going to be making sure you can optimize your sleep quality. I think that's very important. Number two, I would say trying to regain control over your life. A lot of women in that transitional period, they feel like they're constantly in chaos. It's like every single day, you wake up because your kid's jumping on your face or whatever it is. They're constantly in chaos and they're running around. Kids got practice, picking them up from school, going to work a 9 to 5, coming home, doing it all by yourself. And for the moms that are doing that, I was raised by a single mom, and I like to say that she was superwoman for me. But the reality is you still have to find time for yourself to do something. Whether it's wake up a little bit early before the first kid, whether it's have some quiet time, you get the kids to bed at a reasonable hour and you got an hour before bed to do whatever you want. Things like that can be very, very helpful. The other thing I would say is just make sure you're feeding yourself enough to thrive. I would say protein at every meal spaced out throughout the day is going to be extremely important. So if you want to eat 4 meals a day, each meal has 30 to 40 grams of protein. That's a really good start. You can monitor your carbohydrate intake. I think most women should be eating roughly about 150 grams of carbohydrates at least per day, just to help with their metabolism, fiber intake, and the conversion from leptin to the thyroid and various other metabolic processes. I think that's generally a good rule of thumb. And then utilizing an evidence-based amount of dietary fat per day, going to be very important as well to support your hormones and your endocrine system, your skin, your hair, your nails, all that stuff. And I would say probably 50 to 75 grams of fat per day, but there's a lot of different modification that can go on inside of just what I said. So, you could start there, but then ultimately you're a very specific individual. And then I would also say maybe spend some time just recovering a bit more, still go to the gym and lift weights, but I'd probably avoid trying to burn as many calories as possible or going to the calorie burn class. When I used to be a personal trainer, there was a girl that would come out of the class and she would say, I can guarantee I'll help you burn 1,000 calories in an hour. Right. And that was her marketing pitch.
Yeah.
And all these girls would be walking in the gym and they're like, oh, going to that spin class. Yeah. And I'm like, that is the complete wrong message you want to send. And I would even say that all of that is a lie, because you can't dictate the metabolic health of anybody unless you actually have data to validate it. So while you can say this class is going to help me burn 500, what if you're extremely metabolically adapted with hypothyroidism and you've been on 1,000 calories for 4 to 6 months? Is she still going to burn 500 to 1,000 calories? Absolutely not. Right. And so to summarize, I'd say sleep, nutrition, monitoring stress, taking control of your life, I'd say lift weights specifically. And then you could also support the hormones that are being negatively impacted. So you could utilize supplements like berberine to help with blood glucose control. You can walk more, do more parasympathetic like activity. You can take things that help you manage stress like ashwagandha or a blend of ashwagandhas, L-theanine to help with the happy hormones, and GABA to help with the happy hormones, a bioidentical progesterone or chasteberry to help with progesterone. You could also utilize something that may help with androgens, something like, I'd probably go with probably something like fenugreek or boron or iron, things like that can actually help with androgens as well. But be mindful that nothing will really help any of this stuff more than making the lifestyle change. That's the important thing. All the supplements and stuff, that's like the icing on the cake. Your body's smarter than you. It already knows what it's supposed to do. But I am for supporting various hormones that have been negatively impacted. So that's what I would say, a general ballpark of what should be done.
Okay, excellent.
Now, once you're back to feeling good, then I think you should be applying some stressors to your body, like maybe doing some high intensity stuff, maybe going a little bit harder in the gym, really try to get as strong as you can, eating a high protein diet, like doing the things that are going to help make you more resilient. But for most of the women that come to us, they're chronic low calorie dieters. And so for them, we have to recover them in order to make them resilient again.
Yeah, I think the key point is making sure you are building muscle instead of losing it, instead of depleting it. So you have a course called Female Fat Loss. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So I have an education course. It's 11 different parts. Every single module has probably like a 20 slide PDF. And then it's also usually probably like a 30 to 45-minute video that comes with the PDF. And it's 11 different modules. And it's called The Art of Female Fat Loss. And ART stands for Applied Recovery Techniques. And so I wanted to make that course because initially I realized that a lot of coaches didn't have the education or the information that I was putting out there. And so what I decided to do was I sold it for probably like a year and a half. And I realized that a lot of people that took the course said, William, you just explained this stuff so easily and so clear and concise. I think anybody could take this and learn from it. So therefore, what I do now is any female client that I bring in, if I'm offering this, is I'll say, hey, we have an education course. If you decide to work with me for the next 6 months, I'll include the female course. And something that's really cool is we actually just brought in an NP to actually help us with the perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopausal information too, because we are getting and acquiring a lot of ladies that are around 40 years old or maybe a little bit more than that. And so I want to provide the education to them, because if I don't, then who else is going to do it? I know that there's some phenomenal educators out there talking about the same stuff. And I would urge a lot of people to really look into what they're doing. People that paved the way for me. A gentleman by the name of Lyle McDonald was one of the first people that I had ever heard actually talking about it. And that was at the time when I really started to unpack the fact that my female clients did not respond the same as my male clients. And he actually put out a book, I think like a couple of years later. And then recently I actually discovered a woman by the name of Dr. Stacy Sims, who is absolutely brilliant. She's incredible. And so I would recommend those two educators for sure, because I think they're leaps and bounds ahead of where the industry is right now, but they're exactly where the industry is going, which is female focused.
We actually we dictate the market, right? Because we're such a huge population right now, so we demand this basically.
But yes, the education course is available. Anybody can contact me if they're interested in it, or if they're interested in actually coaching with myself or my team. We just typically would include the education course with the coaching package, because we'd like to teach you at the same time we're actually coaching you.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll drop the link for that to your Instagram. What's the best, where can everyone find you?
Oh, this is a mouthful. Okay. So I would say the number one location, that would be my Instagram. It's at William_Grazione. I am on Facebook, William Grazione. The website is theeducatedDieter.com. My YouTube channel is William Grazione. And then we also have a lot of free products on the website. We have a podcast called Hey Coach Radio. We have 100 episodes on there. It's been downloaded, I think, like 50,000 times. So a lot of people are there checking out the information stuff. And that's how the best way to get a hold of us.
I am going to drop all of those links in the show notes. Don't worry about trying to remember that. So thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you want to add on? We've talked a lot.
We've definitely talked a lot, but I would say just as in general, the general idea here to simplify everything that we talked about is simply this. I think every single woman out there needs to understand that she's powerful and that she can take back control of her life. But it all starts with awareness, right? And I think that for a majority of women, they have treated their bodies poorly for a long duration of time, which has led to the adaptations that they're currently struggling with, right? It's like the weight gain, the brain fog, the insulin resistance, the hormone imbalances, all of that kind of thing. So if you simply just stop for a second and take a look back and reflect, you would see that your choices have probably led to exactly where you are right now. And it's not too late to adjust those choices. But in many cases, you have individuals like yourself, Kathy, and myself, who are kind of forward thinking in regards to what's going on. So learn from us, absorb the information, become an educated dieter. That's my best advice. Stop low calorie eating and lift weights.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Kathy.